Hey everybody, this is Brenden with Common Motor. It's common-motor.com on the internet, and today we're going to show you how to do the rebuild on the 175 series carburetors. This applies to the CB175, CL175, SL175, CB200, and CL200 series of bikes from Honda, built from the late 60s to the mid 70s. So stay tuned. So I want to talk about the idle mixture circuit on this this carburetor style. This is what's called an air bleed style mixture adjustment for the idle speed. Now, what that means is that one of those mixture screws will thread into the carburetor body right here, and what we're doing is adding or subtracting air from the idle circuit to make the adjustment. You can either adjust it by adding or subtracting fuel or adding and subtracting air. And in this case, we're adding and subtracting air with this style screw. Kind of a quick note is usually if you have a mixture screw that's very close to the opening of the carburetor body, it's going to be an air screw or an air adjustment screw versus one that's towards the back of the body behind the slide or the butterfly, which will usually be a fuel adjustment screw. So there's two different ways of approaching it in the carburetor design. So in this air screw, basically as the screw gets threaded in, you're going to be richening the mixture up because you're reducing the level of air that's in there, and the opposite is true as you back the screw out. You're increasing the amount of air that comes in the system and therefore leaning the mixture out. So that's really important to make the difference because not all mixture screws are the same. A lot of people think that it's always a field control. In this case, it's an air control. Now, in reference to the actual screws themselves, we have two different styles of screws that were used in these carburetors, in these air mixture screw carburetors. While the heads are different on them, that's not the detail I'm worried about. I'm talking about the body of the screw. We have the solid type here, which means it's just a solid piece of brass, and then we have what's called the hollow type, where we have a hole that runs through the perpendicular to the body of the screw, and then there's also a hole in the end. And I'll explain what the difference is and between them. The solid screw is the simplest, meaning that if this screw is turned all the way in and seats inside the body of the casting, we have blocked off all air. So that means no air is coming into the idle mixture circuit, just fuel. Honda later on got away from this design and went to a hollow style screw, which means that even though the screw is threaded all the way in and seated, there is still air flowing into the system because it comes through the middle of the screw and out the side of the body there. So even in a closed position, there's a minimal amount of air coming in versus in the solid screw, if it is closed, there's no air coming in. Now, either one works. What's important is to make sure you either use the same type in your carburetor or to match up the style that came out of your particular carburetor body. On this CL175 carburetor, it has the hollow style screw came out of it, so that's what we're going to put back in. But either screw works as long as they're the same on the carburetor, and you understand that on the solid one, if you seat it all the way, there's no airflow, so they have to always be not seated. But we're going to put that one aside, and we're going to use the hollow one. As usual, I'm going to put a little drop of oil on my threads, like that. Grab my spring, put my spring on here, and that threads right into there. I'm going to thread it until I feel it seat. Real gentle, like that. Keep going, keep going. Then get that seated right there. See where I'm at right there. Okay. So I'm seated all the way, and I'm going to go one full turn out from this position. We got half, one full turn. And that's my starting position for that mixture screw. The next thing we're going to put in is called the slide stop screw, or this is kind of the idle speed control screw, because it sets the slide that comes down to the carburetor body. It sets the height which it rests when you're at idle speed and controls what your idle RPM will be. Now there's a few details here that are on the carburetor that have never been pointed out in any kind of Honda documentation as far as I can tell, but we're going to show you those details here, and it's going to make setting up your carburetor and adjusting it exponentially easier, because I know a lot of people struggle with getting 175 carbs in a initial synchronized position. The first thing I'm going to point out here, so this is our part of the casting where that screw goes into. And if you look real closely, we have this rib right here on the very top. That rib is kind of like 12 o'clock on the looking at a clock. It's a reference place for adjusting the screw. That works in conjunction with our screw here. And what I have in front of us is I have this is one of our new screws in the kit. And here's an original screw right here. And we're going to use the original screw as a reference because it's easier to see what's going on. I'm going to turn it over, and we're going to see that there is a little mark on top of the screw that looks like a letter T. It's very fine. I put some silver paint on this one so you can see it on the video. And our new ones in the kit are also marked. A lot of kits that have been out there do not have this mark on it because I never noticed that detail. This detail is super important to get the carburetors set up. This is our position that we're going to put the screw into, so the slides are matched left to right on each carburetor. So I'm going to put it in the carburetor here, and you'll see I'm going to be lining this tick mark on the screw up with that line on the body, and the other line that goes across the circumference of the body here will end up going up flush to this casting here. And that ensures that both screws on either carburetor are in the same position for a reference starting synchronization. Now, it doesn't mean that's where they'll live when you adjust the bike, but it puts them in the same spot when you're putting the carburetors back together as a zeroing position. And if they got a sync, well, you just return them to that spot and start over again. As usual, I'll put a little drop of oil on my threads here. I do have a new spring. My new spring will go in first. And I'm going to make sure you guys can see from right there. I'm going to thread this guy in. And as I bring it around, see my little mark. I'm going to keep going. Keep going. Almost there. And one more turn. Make sure I got it lined up. All right. That's my starting position. You can see how the tick mark on the screw lines up with the casting, and then the one that goes around the circumference is flush with the body there. So that is the starting position for this screw. The same thing will be done on the other carburetor. And as you make any adjustments to the idle speed in the future, you'll make sure you turn the screw the same increment left and right. But if we have to re-zero it, that's our zeroing position. All right, we're going to go ahead and put the manifold back on. And if you look at our manifold, we have an O-ring groove on this side, and this side is flat, and then we have an O-ring groove on the carburetor body here. So the flat end goes against the side with the O-ring like that, and then this side will go against the engine. And luckily our kit has the right size O-ring that actually fits in there. What do you know? That goes like that. Here are my two screws. I'm going to put a little dab of anti-seize on them. Just feel them seat and just snug. We don't have to go crazy with them. When I go to put this on the bike, I have a new O-ring for that as well. We'll drop that O-ring in. We'll go to put it on the bike, but we're not going to use that at this moment. I know a lot of you want to go ahead and jump to the slide and the cable setup, but we're not going to do that because typically when these come off the bike, you have to remove the slide and cable from the bike first, and then unbolt the carbs. And the carbs are usually paired together, left and right, and they're held together with this link bar that actuates the choke. So we're going to go ahead and install the link bar on this one because we definitely would put it on the other carb, and the pair would go onto the bike body. We have a little tiny hole here on this pivot, and originally we had a really small little cotter pin in there, super tiny. Oftentimes they just kind of fall apart, and we don't have new ones for it. But our link bar goes on, and our washer goes on like that, and we have a little workaround. I'm just going to use a piece of safety wire, and I'm going to safety wire through the hole there so we can make this work. Come through the hole. So all this does is keep that linkage from falling off. All right, I'm going to change position here so you guys can see a little bit better. So I'm going to do the safety wire now, because I'm going to bend it up one way, like that. I'm going to bend the other one the opposite way. We're going to make kind of like a letter S with it. I'm just going to kind of work this a little bit, the pliers, so it sits kind of flat. Just some needle nose. And if you screw it up, just cut another piece of safety wire and go with it. Just something like that, just so it stays in place, and then I can take my cutters and I'll just trim off the excess right here, out of the way. Like that. This also makes it so you can take it apart in the future should you need to. You sometimes have to make this adjustment here on the bar because it does turn, because you want the carburetor chokes to be in sync, but that's an easy way to make that repair without using those little tiny cotter pins. It functions the same way. That's not going to come out for this purpose. The last thing we're going to go ahead and get into is assembling the top cap and slide configuration, because that actually attaches to the throttle cable. And here's one of our throttle cables here. On the bike, and if your throttle cable is worn out, we do have new replacements for both CB and CL. They are different and different lengths. And quick note on the throttle cables here, even the end pieces here are different lengths depending on what side they run to, and we have them marked. All the information is on the packaging, but again, making sure that is accurate, because this assembly will go onto the cable, carbs go on the bike, and then all that stuff comes together on the bike. But we'll mock it up here on the bench so you guys can see it in context. So let's do the slide first. I'm going to put these top pieces out of the way, and we'll get to the slide and our needle. I am going to point out a very important detail of the slide here. This is one that stumps a lot of folks. These slides are left and right specific on the carburetors. At first glance, they look the same, but they are mirrors of one another. The way they know they go in is that the square side of the slide here, this side, I should say, this side here that has the big flat edge on it, this is going to go towards the engine, and this angled side is going to go towards the air cleaner. And I can tell you this is the wrong side for this carburetor, because it would go in this direction, like that, and that big notch is where that the idle speed screw is, but no idle speed screw because it's on that side of the carburetor. So if I tried to put this in, you can see how it would be backwards, with that flat side facing the air cleaner and the cutaway side facing the engine. So that is our proper slide for this side of the engine, because now the flat side faces the engine, cutaway side faces the air cleaner. So don't mix them up. If you mix them up, you'll never get your bike to run correctly. We've even seen other professionals can't get these bikes running because they don't realize that there's that minor difference there. All right, there's our correct slide. I'm going to put the other one away so I don't accidentally grab it. So that's our slide, and let's talk about our slide needle. Our kit does come with 2 new needles in it, and they are labeled at the very top of the needle, 175 or 200 to make life easy. In front of this one here, I have the original needle, and I'm going to make sure when I put my new clip on, I put it in the same position that the one came out of. Now this one is like 1 notch up from the bottom. That's not a bad place to start. If you're not sure where to put it right in the middle. There's 5 notches, and that's a good starting place. This needle comes out to do some adjustment on the carbs to make sure you don't have a lean spot or a rich spot. You can move the needle up and down for mixture adjustments as you're giving it throttle. But we're going to go 1 notch up, just the way this needle is, just to match it to start. Got my clip on right there. Sometimes you can just push it on with your finger like that. Be real careful not to lose it. They kind of fly and fling around. They can launch across the room and you'll never find it. So just be real careful when you're putting it in. So that is on there, and we'll get that put into the slide. I'm gonna put the carburetor aside right now, frame, because we don't really need it at this point. Okay, we're gonna assemble the slide with our needle and our little retaining clip here. I'm gonna point out this detail. We see this long groove in the slide. That's where the cable ends up going, and it's also where there's an alignment notch inside the carburetor body. But when we put in our clip here, this wide open end will be facing that slot because we have to have clearance for the cable. Okay, we're gonna drop that needle in like that. I'm gonna get this clip in here. I'm gonna try to grab it with the pliers real quickly here. Squeeze on it. I don't want to launch it across the room. So I kind of have it in place. I'm going to push it in place with a screwdriver real quick. Come on. All right, got the clip, and I had to kind of fiddle with it off camera because I had to look down in there. You can see that the opening of the clip there is facing the slot, so we can clear the cable. And it's also keeping the needle in place. If you have to remove it, all you have to do is actually push on the needle and it'll pop the clip out. But right now, that is the proper orientation of the clip. Here's our top cap. We have this is our adjuster. I'm gonna put a dab of anti-seize on that. Just a little bit there. I'm gonna go ahead and thread that in all the way. That's an important adjuster right there. Okay, great. We have our top cap gasket. These can feel a little weird sometimes, but once you get it in place, it'll take a seat and won't move. And it's not really a gasket you end up messing with very much. That's kind of how it ends up seating like that on there. I just want to make sure that it's square in place there because that butts up against the top of the carburetor body. All right, that should be good there. Okay, let's do the last part of the assembly here. So I have the throttle cable here. We're assuming that this would be on the bike, and you'd be putting this. Our carburetor would be bolted in place on the engine, and we'll be adding the slide to it later. Here's our order sequence. We have our top ring here. I'll slide that on first. And then we're going to take our top cap. Get the cable through there. Pull it out. Next is going to be our spring. I'm actually holding pressure on that top cap there. Our spring all the way through. Make sure it's seated. Push the spring down. I'm going to hold it back with my finger so I can get the cable exposed. Then I'm going to take my slide. Just get the cable slide like that. Let the spring drop, and that's how that assembly comes together. The carburetor. Let's put it in the carb body. I'm just going to go with a little bit of anti-seize on these threads here because they tend to get kind of corroded, and because you will be taking it off again sometime in the future. We want to make sure it comes off nice and clean. We'll just do a little bit of that. All right, so this the slide only orients into the body in one direction. It's going to be a little fiddly here with me on the bench versus being on the bike, but I think you guys will get the idea. The large notch is going to go on the side that has our adjuster, and there's another little notch that's smaller. The groove goes in. Our cap is oriented that way, where the adjuster screw is towards the engine side, and then we bring down our thread on there square. There we go. Just like that. Just hand tight. All right, that is installed there, and then any kind of cable adjustment is going to happen here. We'll get into that in a different video on the sync, and then you bring our boot down and lock the boot in place, and that keeps the adjuster in place during the sync. But that's going to be it for doing it on the bench, which would be the same as just getting it on the bike. Okay, we're going to just check to make sure that our slide is working properly, and coming back, open, closed, open, closed. Nice and smooth, like a mouse trap, as it should. this concludes our rebuild on this Honda CL175 carburetor, and of course all this information does convey back to the other models we mentioned earlier, the CB175, SL175, CB and CL200 as well. All use the same basic carburetor. We do have a following video coming out that talks about how to set up the synchronization of the carburetors while on the bike. We did point out a lot of details about that idle speed screw or the slide adjustment screw. That gives us an initial starting position to run the bike. We also have to have the cable adjusted as well, but that's an on the bike thing. So again, stay tuned for that other video. Two last things I want to mention while they're in my head. First off, all of the carburetor parts that we use in this video, I will have links below to the website so you can get what you need from there. The other thing is that we've seen a lot of copies of these carbs or knockoffs being sold through places like eBay or Amazon. And while they look the part, they really don't necessarily work the part. And a lot of people have had some tuning problems with them, so I can't really recommend them as a replacement. I think it's best to actually use the original Honda Keihin carburetor on these bikes because they work as they should. With that, I hope you have learned something about your bike on this one. As always, this is Brenden with Common Motor, common-motor.com on the internet. Make sure you like us and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Subscribe to our newsletter via our website, and of course, subscribe to this YouTube channel right down below. Hit the bell for notifications, and we will see you next time.